people with ME/CFS often say, it's like I got the flu, but a flu that never went away. And to make a long story short, our bodies, when we get a virus like the flu, has a hardwired response that causes the symptoms, that causes us to be fatigued. So what don't we do? We don't exercise and use
Right.
energy doing that. We don't think very hard and use energy doing that. We don't have a good appetite, so we don't eat a lot, so we don't digest, and digestion requires energy. Our body is hardwired to throttle down behaviors that take energy so that the energy we've got can be preserved to fight the infection.
I'm Haylie Pomroy, #1 New York Times best-selling author, and the Assistant Director of the Integrative Medicine Program at the Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine. Today, we're going to talk a lot about ME/CFS, and I am fortunate to be joined with Dr. Anthony Komaroff. Dr. Komaroff is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He is also a senior physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Komaroff has been studying and doing research in the field of ME/CFS for over 40 years. Dr. Komaroff, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Haylie.
Our community was so excited to have you. I posted a couple days ago that I was getting the chance to interview you, and we had tons of questions. You have such an extensive background, and it's touched in so many aspects of this syndrome or complexity of symptom profile that the questions were pretty vast. But I want to first ask you, how did you get interested in this space? How did, in your expression of medicine, how did you land here?
Early in my career, I saw several patients who told me something that I'd never heard before and I'd never been taught in medical school. They said they'd come down with what seemed like a brief flu viral illness, but this time, unlike many previous times, they never got better. It was now months or years later, and they were still suffering from symptoms that had made it very hard for them to function. I said I hadn't heard of that. I went into the textbooks. I couldn't find any reference to such an illness in the textbooks. I did the usual laboratory tests, and the results came back normal. And so I had a dilemma. Either these patients were imagining their symptoms,
right,
or they had an illness that medicine had not yet recognized and figured out.
I love that you said the word "or," and I love what you just said, an illness that medicine had just not recognized yet or figured out. That gave me chills because it gave so many people validation. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please keep going. I'm underlining this. This is great.
Yeah. So anyway, I said, well, this is interesting. If I'm going to help these people, I have to see if I can find any underlying physical abnormalities that are caused by this illness and that are causing the symptoms of the illness. And that I began looking for those, and that's how it all began.
And where were you practicing at the time?
At the Brigham and Women's Hospital.
And when you were seeing patients, it's like, were you seeing more and more? Were more and more referrals coming in with this, or was it, just kind of trickling in with your patient population?
It was trickling in with the patient population initially, but over the next 5 years or so, word got out and interest in the illness started to grow, and then it became more like a flood.
Oh, unfortunately, right? I wish it was a dwindling trickle is what I hope for the future. When you started seeing patients, had they previously seen typically other practitioners that weren't acknowledging what they had going on? I mean, we hear about that a lot in our community about people sometimes seeing 20 doctors in 10 years before they finally get a diagnosis. Were you seeing that they were coming to you having had already been to other people?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was often the case. Sometimes those other physicians were genuinely puzzled and were trying to figure it out, but couldn't. But other times, some of the physicians decided to dismiss the patients and
Right.
say, if I can't figure out your diagnosis, that's my problem. And I don't like having a problem. So I'm going to make it your problem. The problem is you. You're imagining that you have these symptoms. And I saw that happening to lots of patients.
Hey guys, it's Haylie again. Right about now, you might have questions that pertain to you and only to you. Let's continue the conversation. Go to HayliePomroy.com/member and get a free 30-day trial of my membership community. You're going to love this place. Post your questions, ask your questions, grab some downloads, and let's get you the help you deserve.
I think being in the community and being in the patient perspective, right, and having an autoimmune disorder myself, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you expressing that with all of your expertise and expressing and validating that a patient can feel that way and can feel treated that way. When I first heard of this, it was called chronic fatigue syndrome. Then the ME part came on. How was that evolution and what does it mean and why was it so important that that happened?
Well, chronic fatigue syndrome is an awful name. It trivializes the illness because every human being says, well, I've been fatigued. Everybody's got fatigue.
Right. I'm tired too. Yeah.
The name did not convey how debilitating the illness was, how badly it interfered with people's lives at home and at work. So it was myalgic encephalomyelitis was a term that had actually begun use 40, 50 years ago in Britain. And many of us in the United States tried to make it a part of the name of the illness. I hope ultimately it becomes the only name of the illness and chronic fatigue syndrome is dropped.
Wow, that would be fabulous. I have heard things about adding immune dysregulation, immune exhaustion. There's been a lot of better nomenclature, I think, that would describe some of what's happening in the body. When you started to study this illness, and it's really cool to me that it was patient driven. Who else was in the field? Was it far and few between? Were we leaning on other pre-viral illnesses? Was it more recognized internationally? What did the field look like?
It was a small group of doctors and physician scientists in Atlanta, Bethesda, Denver, Miami, Dr. Kleinis's group, who were getting interested at about the same time in the 1980s. And then gradually, particularly after the early 1990s, we and others had begun for the first time to identify some of those underlying physical abnormalities that were in this illness, to find tests that were abnormal compared to the initial experience of the usual tests not showing abnormalities.
What were some of those? What were some of those?
Well, those initially in the 1990s, there were abnormalities primarily of the brain and the immune system. For example, at about the same time, Dr. Kleinis's group and our group had identified that a certain type of white blood cell called natural killer cells that are very important in fighting viral infections, they were not working well. When you put them in the laboratory dish and challenged them to do their job, they just weren't working well.
And so we saw that modification in the immune system. What kinds of things were we? I'm sorry, my brain just keeps going. I have a heartache for people that were told it's all in their head, that were told that it's menopause, or were told that they just need to get rest. I mean, every time when I hear brilliant scientists like yourself validate this for patients, I have heartbreak for those people that have lost hope or feel like they're going to lose hope in their journey, back to some sort of homeostasis. Physiologically, what did we see in the brain?
Boy, there have been so many different abnormalities in the brain and the autonomic nervous system, which is sort of a part of the brain, but it spreads out to the rest of the body. Really, over the last 20 years in particular, there have been a huge number of abnormalities found that involve the brain, the autonomic nervous system, the immune system, but also energy metabolism, the gut microbiome, the bacteria that live in all of our guts, and the cardiovascular system, the heart and the blood vessels. There are so many abnormalities of the brain and of all of these other organ systems. It's not possible to summarize them in a short interview like ours.
But this is so good for people to have this conversation. How do people find doctors that have some semblance of education in this? Because we want to educate our upcoming physicians and re-educate, our physicians that are currently practicing. We had an interesting conversation in clinic the other day where we were talking about how COVID happened all at once for physicians. So many physicians that didn't know how to treat long viral dysregulation are being forced to, because it was this large volume of people, and COVID was definitely recognized and believed. But that a lot of the doctors like yourself that were studying ME/CFS for so many years have educated, so they were able to kind of leapfrog what that dysregulation looks like in long COVID because of what they had studied in ME/CFS. Do you agree with that?
I do, but not every doctor does. I think we, in fact, last year in 2023, we published a paper that pointed out not just the similar symptoms of ME/CFS and long COVID, which had been recognized pretty much since the COVID pandemic began, but if you look at the literature, there now are thousands of published scientific articles of the brain, of the immune system, of energy metabolism, and they're saying the same thing about the similarities in the underlying abnormalities of both ME/CFS and long COVID. So I'm one of those people who thinks that what we learn about the underlying biology of ME/CFS will apply, in most cases at least, to long COVID and vice versa. So the real encouraging news is that the world, the government of the United States in particular, is spending lots more money, finally, on studying long COVID, and hopefully that'll translate into ME/CFS and other post-infectious fatigue syndromes, which I think both long COVID and ME/CFS are.
Wow. And I heard somebody the other day use the term that what we're seeing now is the true pandemic, that the post dysregulation in the body is really making an impact on a lot of people, and an impact on people that fall all across the spectrum. Had COVID really bad, didn't have COVID really bad, potentially a vaccine associated with it. There's good research going into all of that, which is great, and funding. But that this is forcing, both the patient and the physician to understand what's happening in the body. And that's what I want to ask you is, what is it that you think is causing the kind of the physical abnormalities and all of these symptoms?
And let me start with what I think is not causing ME/CFS. I think, and I've always thought, that ME/CFS is not an illness caused by a single novel infectious agent in the way that HIV is the necessary trigger for AIDS.
Got it.
I think instead, ME/CFS is caused by the way the immune system and the energy metabolism respond to an infection. So what do I mean? I mean that people with ME/CFS often say, it's like I got the flu, but a flu that never went away. I think
Right.
there's a clue in that. And And the question is, why do we feel sick the way we do when we get the flu? What is happening in our body that causes the sickness symptoms? And the science of that is now coming into view. We have understood that when you get an infection, the immune system has to attack it. And attacking it requires energy. And energy in the form of ATP molecules is something that our body has only so much of. So what do we need to do to find the energy to fight the infection? The body needs to stop or throttle down any kind of energy consuming activities that are absolutely necessary.
Okay.
If we can preserve the energy to fight the infection. And to make a long story short, our bodies, when we get a virus like the flu, has a hardwired response that causes the symptoms, that causes us to be fatigued. So what don't we do? We don't exercise and use energy doing that. We don't think very hard and use energy doing that. We don't have a good appetite, so we don't eat a lot, so we don't digest, and digestion requires energy. Our body is hardwired to throttle down behaviors that take energy so that the energy we've got can be preserved to fight the infection. That's something that's well established, not just in humans, but in all animals where it's ever been studied. You can tell when your pets.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
My background is in agriculture, animal sciences, then biochemistry, then nutrition, right? And now neuroimmunology. But I always say, we know, and we nourish our pets better than we nourish most of ourselves. I always say we do not walk out the door and don't feed our dog. Yet we walk out the door without breakfast to expect our bodies to heal and think and perform. And, but in every animal model, in captivity and in the wild, you're right. The body is designed to gear down in order to conserve. And we're making progress understanding some of the causes, some of the triggers, I guess we would call them, right, for ME CFS. What are some of the things that we have identified as triggers? I know you mentioned a viral component.
Right. Many different kinds of infectious agents, not just viruses, but also some bacteria, some protozoans like Giardia.
Right.
That infects our guts. A very similar illness to ME/CFS and to long COVID follows a whole variety of different infections. It's been well established. And it's even interesting that following certain injuries, not non-infectious injuries, like a bad auto accident or like Gulf War illness that Dr. Klimas studies, where there is a physical injury to the body in Gulf War illness from toxins that we're exposed to. These injuries to the body trigger a very similar illness to the post-infection illness that we are talking about today. And that in the same reason, in my opinion, the body has to heal that auto accident injury, that Gulf War illness, toxic injury. And to heal it, it has to throttle down other energy consuming activities to preserve the energy necessary to heal the injury.
Hey guys, it's Haylie Pomroy, your host. Right about now, you're probably struggling to achieve the health that you deserve, and you're just not sure what you need to do in order to get it. So what I've done is I've created a special link for you that will give you the nutrition and supplement programs that I use in my private practice to achieve amazing results for my clients and my community. Go to HayliePomroy.com/podcast. Plus, when you use that link, you'll get a 20% discount just because I love you. Again, that's HayliePomroy.com/podcast. Now, back to the episode.
It does feel like there's many triggers that are all affect our bodies to adapt to those, like a hormetic event that causes our bodies to create a dysfunctional homeostasis, right? Where we can't quite get traction, either clear a virus, detoxify efficiently. We find residual in the GWI population, we find residual toxins decades later, generations later, right? Toxins that are transmitted or delivered, to the next generation through pregnancy. And it's those bodies. Do you think there's a genetic component or a predisposition? Like, what is it? The HLA-A with the toxicity and the molds. I mean, we're looking at some of those expressions. Do we think that could be, is it the perfect storm or is it the perfect environment during the storm? Or is it both?
Most human illnesses are a combination of a genetic vulnerability plus something in the environment that brings out that vulnerability. And I think that's likely to prove true in ME/CFS and long COVID. I would say there's already pretty strong evidence that there is a genetic component to both long COVID and ME/CFS. Now, how exactly those genetic differences make a person vulnerable, that we don't even begin to understand yet. But I think genes are a part of it, and the environment, in this case, infectious agents, that, like the toxins you were referring to, Haylie, remain in the body.
Right.
And so the immune system sees that the battle actually isn't over. When we get the flu, that we feel sick for a week because it takes about a week for the immune system to eradicate the virus. But with ME/CFS, and certainly with long COVID, there's now strong evidence that many people with long COVID have still some of the COVID virus.
Yes.
In their body. And their immune system sees that. And the immune system says, hey, the battle's not over. We have to keep fighting. And that ongoing battle that the immune system has to fight is what's leading to the ongoing symptoms of the illness.
I love that you say that. It was so interesting during the heat of the pandemic. I felt really fortunate to have so many, brilliant scientists around and people just feeling like they could kind of question things and collaborate. And I'll never forget when the 10 to 14 day, it'll clear your body. It should clear the body in 10 to 14 days. And I mean, people in the room were literally screaming. Immunologists were going, this virus doesn't act like that. Maybe for some people, but we're discounting so many people that are going to struggle after this. Did you have that angst, that feeling while all this was going on? And was that happening in your medical space?
Yes, I think most people assumed that this virus, once the immune system got rid of it, would be gone for good. Because other viruses like it, that's often true.
Right.
RNA viruses are thought to be easier to eradicate from the body than DNA viruses, like herpes viruses, for example, which live in the body for the rest of your life once you get infected. So people did think, the immune system is going to win this battle in short order, and then everything should be hunky-dory. Well, right. Reasonable expectation, but I think it has unfortunately turned out not to be true.
So you mentioned some things that don't clear the body, some viruses that don't clear the body, and a lot of the conversation around ME/CFS, but also long COVID, people are talking about specifically a group of viruses, but a lot of times I feel like the conversation goes towards EBV or Epstein-Barr virus. Do you think that can be also one of the infectious triggers, or is that reactivated when the immune system goes wonky? I'll use that very scientific term. Feel free to use it in your next lecture at Harvard.
I do think that in some people, the Epstein-Barr virus, which is one kind of herpes virus,
right,
and another virus too, something called human herpes virus 6, and possibly other herpes viruses that are living asleep inside the brain in many of us, they get reactivated or reawakened by the COVID, or in ME/CFS by whatever the triggering agent was. And once they get reactivated, particularly if they're reactivated in the brain, that they now are another battle in the brain that the immune system has to fight. And again, that's producing the symptoms, according to the theory that I put forward, as producing the symptoms just like the initial COVID virus was. It's a complex thing. Probably there isn't a single reason for the illness in every person, that there are multiple different contributing reasons.
I know that you are taking this approach of just honoring the complexity of the patient and their personal experience, but also recognizing the complexity of getting the patient back into a healthier state of homeostasis. I know that you're doing that in the patient setting. Please tell me you're also doing this as you're educating the doctors, as you're educating the next generation of practitioners.
We're trying to.
Okay.
Very hard. To be honest, doctors throughout the world, and certainly the ones I know in the United States, have been under such pressure for the last several years, in large part because of the pandemic, but other things too, that trying to teach people about a new illness like ME/CFS, which is not real new, but it's new to many doctors.
Right.
Long COVID is brand new in the last few years. And the fact is, we have a lot more answers today than we did 20 years ago, but we still don't have enough answers. And that means we don't have enough stuff to teach doctors. What we don't have yet are definite diagnostic tests or proven FDA-approved treatments. And that's what a practicing doctor wants to know.
Right.
I'm supposed to take care of patients with this illness. Okay, give me the test.
Right.
Treatment, and I'll be able to do something to help my patients. Well, we're still in the process of developing those things. And so we don't have definite tools to give doctors yet.
It was interesting. Someone said to me one time that we wasted so many years, 10 to 20 years, depending. There was just this big waste of, not wasted time, but time that could have been used to develop diagnostics. So to verify the theory, right, or the hypothesis that this could be what's going on with the patient, and to have a protocol for progress, right, for progression of the patient in a positive light, just getting validation that it actually existed. Yeah. And the thing that's a little bit nice is that gap seems to be shortened with the long COVID, or at least to some aspect, or because not that the diagnostics are good or the protocol for progression in a positive direction are good yet, but we don't have to go through those hoops of this is actually something going on in the body and to believe the patient. Do you see that now, that at least we're getting to the forefront of diagnostics and treatment before just debating whether it exists or not?
Yeah, I do. I think we've made, over the 40 years that I've been involved in taking care of patients with ME/CFS and studying it, more recently studying long COVID, there's been enormous progress, not just in what we know about the underlying abnormalities in the body, but awareness in the doctor's community about both of these illnesses. So I think that's good. And unfortunately, we also are learning that both illnesses are really big problems for us. There are at least 3 million people in the United States alone, and many millions more around the world with ME/CFS. There are at least 10 million with long COVID. Many would say more than that, just in the US, 70 million around the world. And has huge implications for our country, for our economy. There's about
Absolutely
2% of the workforce in the United States right now can't work because of long COVID.
I was in I was in DC, in Washington, DC with Dr. Peter Marks. We were doing a podcast together, interviewing him. He's the head of CBER through the FDA. And it was early in COVID. We were, gosh, I want to say, maybe 12 months in at that point. And we were having the conversation about, he's oncological hematologist, and I have an autoimmune disorder, a blood disorder. I have ITP. So I feel like I have good friends that are hematologists all my life growing up. We had a really candid conversation about, some of the comorbidities with COVID, and he was talking about it's going to be the after. It's going to be the after that we're going to have to work really hard to get the American population healthy. It's more than just surviving the pandemic, and I feel I keep replaying that conversation that I had in my mind. I'm in DC. I'm talking to Peter Marks, and he's saying it's going to be the after. It's going to be getting the patient healthy. And I just thought that was a lot of insight. And I know in so much of the work that you've done, you look at the different systems and the different organs and the different pathways and processes. I'm very convicted in nutrition. I'm a nutritionist, right, by trade. But are we saying that we have to strengthen the whole body just as much as attacking a potential pathogen at this point when they're past the original insult?
Yes. Although we don't understand very well how to do that, but yes, nutrition for sure.
Wait, say that again. Nutrition for sure.
For sure.
Love it.
In healing almost any illness.
Right.
Important. And so is regular exercise. But of course, with ME/CFS and long COVID, that's a problem because part of the illness is an intolerance to a negative reaction to exercise if it's pushed too hard. So you have to be very careful with that. And I'm not recommending exercise therapy for either of those two illnesses. So, but
it does lend to the fact that if we know that exercise helps the body be healthy, and you're dealing with something that exercise comes off the table, that also is a contributing factor. It makes it harder for the body to get well. The very state of exercising causing an exacerbation of not just symptoms, but inflammatory response makes it so that we're talking about a syndrome that one of our, I'm going to say, cornerstones of health is pulled away from us. So we have to be really creative at putting other things in until we get the body back to a metabolic state where exercise can be employed. But sometimes it just can't. It's like saying a person with 2 fractured femurs, it'd be really good if you get on the treadmill every day. If that's not the case, then what do? We don't just say, sorry, you can't, you have 2 fractured femurs, no treadmill for you, therefore you can't achieve health. We have to be creative and resourceful and say, what can we come in the back door, the side door, the front door, kick down the door in order to embrace a body where it can create a new homeostasis back towards the progression of health. So I'm glad that you validated that for people, because so my daughter was dealing with some major health positive EBV, PCR, and also HHV6. I ended up at UCLA testing positive to every virus you could imagine. It's kind of a crazy situation. But all her friends were like, you just need to get up. And she's a professional rodeo. She's a type A scholarship student, rides pro rodeo, barrel races, landed her hiney at UCLA and just, was tanked physically. And everybody said, just get up and ride, just get up and run, just get up and exercise. And she said, and sometimes she could get enough rest where psychologically she'd force herself to do it and she would pay for it. I mean, just pay for it. And it was, I'm lucky. I get access to people like you. I have doctors that are trained by people like you. I have Dr. Klimas around in my space, but so many people out there just don't have it. And I think, Dr. Komaroff, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say that everybody out there that's listening, there is so much value in you validating what they're going through. whether it's, we appreciate if our loved ones and our moms and our kids and our parents validate us, but to have somebody in the medical establishment that's had the legacy that you've created validate it for us. I just want to thank you for that gift because it's really, really, really huge to all of those people that are struggling out there.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Haylie. I think though we can't rest easy. We need to master. We need to take action. There is no doubt that there's much more interest in and resources for studying these illnesses now, but I'd urge people to contact your representatives in Congress, contact the director of the National Institutes of Health, and really urge that there be more support for studying ME/CFS as part of the Long COVID initiative, as part of the Women's Health Initiative. It's by investing more in figuring out what's going wrong in the body that we're going to have the good diagnostic tests and, most important, the effective treatments.
And everybody out there, do not underestimate the power of doing that. We would not see the money going towards our veterans right now for Gulf War injury, GWI, for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, if it weren't for very large individuals contacting. So please make sure that you're advocating. Also, where can people get more information about the stuff that we're talking about? Is there, we have, do we have books? Do we have websites? Where can they go to Lee? I've posted, we'll post this everywhere for everybody. But what would be the specific call to action that somebody can do right now to become an empowered patient and an advocate for their loved ones?
There are a growing number of organizations, patient-focused organizations like Solve ME and Open Medicine Foundation on the West Coast that have websites, have information available. The NIH and CDC have information available, and it's not hard to find lots of information online. The problem is some of it is probably incorrect, but that's the internet. But nevertheless, the organizations I've mentioned are the best places, I would say, to get online information.
Okay. Well, I know that this podcast is going to have a ton of questions from our community. Please, may I please have you back on? I know that our community would love it very much. I'd love to come see you when I'm in Boston. I travel to Boston quite a bit. Spend some time, sit in your classes. I just want to learn more. And I really thank you for teaching not only our next generation, but being a huge advocate for your patient and for the re-education of the physicians that are at the front line right now of helping their patients. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the conversation and all the work that you've done on behalf of all of us out there.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Haylie. It's been a pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.